The woman stepped off the train into Red Hollow with a forged marriage certificate and $60 in borrowed cash, and she had exactly 3 days before the man she was supposed to marry realized she'd never actually met him. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the banker watching her from across the platform like a vulture sizing up a carcass. And when her husband-to-be didn't show and the whispers started, Evelyn Cross understood something crucial. She hadn't escaped her old life. She'd walked straight into something worse. If you want to see how a woman with nothing but nerve and numbers brought down an empire built on lies, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The train lurched to a stop with a screech that set Evelyn's teeth on edge. Through the smudged window, Red Hollow looked exactly like what it was. A collection of wooden buildings squatting in the dirt, held together by desperation and dust. She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the cold seep through her glove. February in the Montana Territory wasn't kind to anything, least of all to women arriving alone with lies in their luggage. "End of the line, miss." The conductor's voice carried that practiced disinterest of a man who'd seen too many foolish decisions roll past on steel wheels. Evelyn stood, smoothing her travel-worn skirt with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't. 3 days on a train gave you time to rehearse confidence until it almost felt real. She'd practiced her new signature, Evelyn Mercer, until the loops came naturally. She'd memorized the letters Cole had sent, or rather, the letters someone had sent on Cole's behalf. The handwriting had been too neat, too careful. A man who worked with his hands didn't write like a schoolteacher. She should have paid attention to that detail. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped down. Just a few rough-looking men loading freight and an older woman in black who didn't spare her a glance. The wind hit like a slap, carrying the smell of wood smoke and horse manure, and something else, something metallic that might have been blood from the stockyards or might have been the taste of her own fear. "Mrs. Mercer?" Evelyn turned. The man who'd spoken stood near a post, one boot propped against the wood like he had all the time in the world. He wasn't Cole. She had a photograph, creased and fading, tucked in her bag, and this man was wrong in every dimension. Too soft around the middle, too well dressed for a rancher. His coat was wool, expensive, and his boots had never seen the inside of a barn. "I'm waiting for my husband," she said, keeping her voice level. "Yes, about that." The man pushed off the post and walked closer. Not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. His smile was the kind that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Samuel Porter, I manage the First Bank of Red Hollow. Mr. Mercer asked me to extend his apologies. He's been delayed." The pause before delayed lasted a fraction too long. "Delayed how?" "Troubles with the ranch. Nothing serious." Porter's gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Not lecherous, worse. Calculating. Like he was tallying her worth and finding it wanting. "He'll be along tomorrow, most likely. In the meantime, I've arranged accommodation at the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher keeps a respectable establishment." Evelyn's mind raced. She had $60. Minus the train fare, minus what she'd need for meals until she could sort this mess out, she had maybe $35 standing between her and complete ruin. A boarding house would cost at least 50 cents a day, probably more. "That's very kind," she said, because what else could she say? "I'm sure I can manage on my own until—" "I insist." Porter gestured toward a buggy waiting at the end of the platform. "Red Hollow isn't like the cities back east, Mrs. Mercer. A woman alone here attracts attention. The wrong kind." The threat was gentle as a knife pressed against silk. Evelyn felt it all the same. She let him help her into the buggy because refusing would have been stupider than accepting. The driver was young, barely 20, with a nervous energy that showed in his white-knuckled grip on the reins. Porter climbed in beside her, too close in the confined space. "You're from Philadelphia?" he asked as they started moving. "Yes." The lie came smooth. She was actually from Baltimore, but Evelyn Cross from Baltimore had debts and a reputation she couldn't afford. Evelyn Mercer from Philadelphia was a blank slate. Long way to come for a man you've never met. She looked at him then, really looked. His face was pleasant enough, clean-shaven, ordinary features, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, but his eyes were cold, pale blue, like ice over deep water. "Love works in mysterious ways," she said. Porter laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. "Does it now? Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, What exactly did Cole promise you in those letters? I don't think that's any of your business, Mr. Porter. Everything in Red Hollow is my business. He said it lightly, but there was steel underneath. Every loan, every deed, every transaction that keeps this town running. When a rancher like Cole Mercer suddenly decides he needs a wife, well, that's the kind of thing that concerns me. The buggy rattled down what passed for a main street. Evelyn counted the buildings: a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple. Another saloon. A building that might have been a hotel, or might have been something worse. At the end of the street, standing apart from everything else, was a 2-story structure with First Bank of Red Hollow painted across the front in fresh letters. Cole has been struggling, Porter continued, conversational now, like they were discussing the weather. The ranch, I mean. Drought last summer, harsh winter this year. He took out a loan 6 months ago to cover feed and supplies. Standard terms, 10% interest, payable quarterly. Evelyn said nothing. She'd learned young that silence made people nervous, made them fill the empty space with more than they meant to say. Of course, if he can't make the payments, Porter spread his hands. Well, banks can't run on charity. The boarding house was a narrow building wedged between a seamstress shop and a barber shop. Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a dried-up woman with suspicious eyes and a mouth like a bear trap. She looked Evelyn over with the same calculating assessment Porter had used, coming to equally unflattering conclusions. Rooms 50 cents a day, paid in advance. Meals are extra. No men upstairs, no drinking, no noise after 9. Evelyn counted out $3. 6 days, she said. Mrs. Fletcher pocketed the money without comment and handed her a key attached to a wooden tag. Second floor, end of the hall. Outhouse is in back. If you need washing water, you haul it yourself. The room was exactly what Evelyn expected. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair by a window that overlooked the alley. She set her carpetbag on the bed and sat down, feeling the cheap mattress sag under her weight. She'd made a mistake. Maybe several. The marriage contract was fake, or at least her signature on it was. The real Evelyn Turner had existed, briefly, as a name in a newspaper advertisement. Young widow seeks correspondence with gentleman rancher. Evelyn Cross had answered Cole's letter first, using Evelyn Turner's identity, and by the time anyone could have sorted out the confusion, she'd already be married and legally protected from the debts trailing her like hungry dogs. Except now Cole wasn't here, and a banker who clearly ran this town like a personal fiefdom knew more about her husband's finances than seemed healthy. She pulled out the letters, reading them again by the fading afternoon light. There were 5 in total, written over 3 months. The first one was stiff, formal. Dear Mrs. Turner, I am a rancher in the Montana Territory, seeking a wife of good character and practical nature. I have 640 acres of grazing land, a house, and livestock. I am 42 years old, widowed, no children. If you are willing to consider a match based on honesty and hard work, rather than romantic notions, I would be pleased to continue this correspondence. The others had been warmer, showing flashes of something that might have been humor or might have been desperation. The cattle don't care much for my conversation. A woman who could read and keep accounts would be a considerable improvement over my current situation, which involves talking to a gelding named Brutus who has opinions about everything and the temperament of a Baptist preacher. That one had made her laugh, alone in her rented room in Baltimore, with the landlady pounding on the door demanding 3 months back rent. The last letter had included the marriage contract and $20 for train fare. If you're willing, come to Red Hollow. We'll marry at the courthouse and make the best of whatever this becomes. I won't promise you easy, but I'll promise you honest. Honest. The word felt like a stone in her chest. There was a knock at the door. Evelyn stood, instinctively smoothing her hair, checking that her collar sat straight. Yes? It's Porter. She opened the door but didn't step back to let him in. He stood in the hallway, hat in hand, the very picture of respectability. I thought you might like to know. I sent word out to the Mercer ranch. Cole should receive the message by morning. Thank you. In the meantime, if you need anything at all. His smile was back, that cold calculation dressed up as courtesy. The bank is always happy to help. After he left, Evelyn locked the door and wedged the chair under the handle. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it might buy her a few seconds. She didn't sleep well. The boarding house creaked and groaned like a ship in rough water, and through the thin walls she could hear Mrs. Fletcher moving around downstairs, the sound of voices from the saloon 2 buildings over, the occasional bark of a dog. Somewhere after midnight, she got up and counted her money again. $32.40. In Baltimore, she'd had debts totaling over $300. Money borrowed to pay for her mother's funeral, money owed to the boarding house, money that had somehow multiplied in the 6 months since her mother died, until it felt like the whole city had its hand out expecting payment. She tried working. Governess positions for a woman without references were rare and paid almost nothing. Shop work was worse. The factory would have taken her, but she'd seen what happened to women in the textile mills, broken backs and broken lungs and broken spirits. So she'd answered an advertisement in the matrimonial section and become someone else. The guilt was there, constant and familiar, but so was the survival instinct that had kept her moving when everything else said to quit. Morning came gray and cold. Evelyn dressed in her other good dress, navy wool, practical, the kind of thing a rancher's wife might wear, and went downstairs. Mrs. Fletcher was frying eggs and bacon in a kitchen that smelled like old grease and older disappointment. Breakfast is 20 cents. Evelyn paid and ate standing at the counter, watching through the window as Red Hollow woke up. Men heading to the stockyards. Women with baskets heading to the general store. A boy driving a wagon loaded with firewood. Normal morning business in a frontier town, except there was something off about it, something she couldn't quite name. Then she saw it. Every transaction, every single one, eventually led to the bank. The firewood boy delivered a load to the bank's back door. The women shopping at the general store paid with scrip that had the bank's name printed on it. Even the men heading to the stockyards passed by the bank's front window, and several of them tipped their hats toward it like they were acknowledging a superior. Samuel Porter owned this town. Not officially, maybe, but in all the ways that mattered. "You waiting for your husband?" Mrs. Fletcher's voice cut through her observations. "Yes." The sound conveyed an encyclopedia of judgment. Cole Mercer's a decent man. I'll give him that. But decent don't pay bills. Evelyn turned to look at her. "You know him?" "Everyone knows everyone here. Cole's ranch is about 8 miles northwest. Good land, or it was. His father built that place up from nothing, and Cole, well, he tries." The way she said it made trying sound like a failure. "What happened to his first wife?" Mrs. Fletcher's expression shifted, something almost like sympathy creeping in around the edges. "Fever, 5 years back. She was a good woman, practical, kept the books and the house both running smooth. After she died, things started slipping. And the bank helped out?" "Bank always helps out." Mrs. Fletcher scraped the pan clean with more force than necessary. "Until it don't." Before Evelyn could ask what that meant, the door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, lean in the way of someone who worked hard and ate little, with dark hair going gray at the temples and lines around his eyes that came from squinting into sun and wind. He wore work clothes, denim and flannel and boots that had seen better decades, and he moved with the careful stiffness of someone in pain. His gaze found Evelyn and stopped. "Mrs. Turner?" His voice was rough, unused to much talking, and he looked nothing like the photograph she had. That photograph showed a younger man, clean-shaven, almost handsome. This man looked like he'd been carved from old wood and left out to weather. "Mr. Mercer." She set down her coffee cup with a hand that almost didn't shake. They stood there, taking each other's measure. Whatever Cole Mercer had expected, Evelyn clearly wasn't it. She was too thin, too sharp-featured, with dark circles under her eyes and a wariness that probably showed through any attempt at a pleasant expression. "I apologize for not meeting you yesterday." He said it formal, like he'd practiced. "There was trouble at the ranch." Mr. Porter mentioned. Something flickered in Cole's expression at the banker's name. "Did he?" "He was very helpful." She watched his reaction carefully. "Made sure I had somewhere to stay." "I'm sure he did." Cole glanced at Mrs. Fletcher, who'd gone very still and very interested in their conversation. "Ma'am, if you could give us a moment." Mrs. Fletcher sniffed but withdrew to the kitchen, leaving the door open just enough to eavesdrop. Cole turned back to Evelyn. Up close, she could see the exhaustion ground into him like dirt under fingernails. "I know this isn't what you expected." "No," she agreed. "It's not." The photograph I sent was from 10 years ago, before my wife died. Before... He stopped, jaw working. Before a lot of things. I should have been honest about that. And I should have been honest about why I answered your advertisement. The words came out before she could stop them. Cole's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? This was it. The moment where she could lie and probably pull it off, at least for a while. Or she could tell the truth and watch this whole desperate gamble collapse. Evelyn took a breath. My name isn't actually Evelyn Turner, it's Evelyn Cross. I used a false name because I have debts back east that I can't pay. The marriage contract you signed is legal, technically, but it's based on information that isn't entirely accurate. The silence stretched out like wire pulling taut. Cole's expression didn't change much. He just looked at her with those tired, careful eyes and said, How much? How much what? How much debt? $300, give or take. He let out a long breath. That's a considerable sum. Yes. Anyone coming after you for it? Not yet. But they will eventually. Cole was quiet for another moment, thinking it through with the methodical pace of a man used to problems that didn't have easy answers. Can you read and write? The question caught her off balance. Yes. I worked as a governess before my mother died. Can you manage numbers? Bookkeeping? Yes. Cook? Adequately. Work hard without complaining about it? I've never had the luxury of complaining. Something that might have been approval crossed his face. Then I guess we both came into this dishonest. Seems fair. Evelyn stared at him. You're not angry? Oh, I'm angry. He said it matter of fact. But I'm also desperate. I need someone who can help me figure out why my ranch is bleeding money faster than I can earn it. Porter said it was bad management, and maybe it is, but he trailed off, looking toward the window and the bank beyond. Something doesn't add up. What do you mean? I mean, the loan I took out 6 months ago was supposed to be at 10% interest, but the payments Porter's demanding don't match those terms. And when I asked to see the original contract, he said the paperwork was filed away in some county office 3 days' ride from here. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She knew that game, knew it intimately. Did you keep a copy? My wife always kept copies of everything. After she died, I found boxes of papers in her desk. Never looked through most of them. Seemed like grief tourism. I need to see those papers. Cole studied her. Why? Because if Porter altered your loan terms after you signed, that's fraud. And if he's done it to you, he's probably done it to others. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. You said you needed someone to help figure out where your money was going. I can do that, but I need access to your records, and I need you to trust me, even though I lied about my name. The calculation happening behind Cole's eyes was almost visible. He was weighing risk against reward, desperation against caution. Finally, he nodded. We need to make this official first. Legal. The courthouse opens in an hour. You still want to marry me? She hadn't meant to sound so surprised. Want doesn't have much to do with it. He said it without cruelty, just tired honesty. I need help. You need a fresh start. We both need Porter to think everything is legitimate so he doesn't look too close. Marriage does all of that. It was possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of matrimony. Evelyn found herself oddly relieved. All right, she said, let's get married. The courthouse was a squat building that also served as the land office and the territorial records repository. The justice of the peace was a man named Hendricks, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and rushed through the ceremony with the enthusiasm of someone reading a shopping list. Do you, Cole William Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Evelyn? What's your middle name? Anne. Evelyn Ann Cross. Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband. She looked at Cole, the stranger she was binding herself to, and thought about all the choices that had led here. Every small desperation, every closed door, every moment when survival mattered more than pride. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. That'll be $2. Cole paid. Hendricks had them sign the register. Evelyn used her real name this time, Evelyn Cross Mercer, and handed over a marriage certificate that looked official enough. They walked out into cold sunshine as husband and wife. There's a wagon around back, Cole said. I need to pick up supplies at the general store, then we can head out to the ranch. The general store was dim and crammed with everything from bolts of fabric to boxes of ammunition. The proprietor, a nervous man named Wilson, kept glancing toward the bank across the street while he filled Cole's order. "That'll be $8.60, Wilson said, his voice pitched low. "But, Mr. Mercer, you're already carrying a balance of $23 from last month." Cole's jaw tightened. "I paid that balance 3 weeks ago. Cash." "Yes, well, Mr. Porter said there was interest added and fees for late payment, and I wasn't late." Wilson looked miserable. "I just work here, Mr. Mercer. The bank holds the note on this building. If Mr. Porter says there's a balance, there's a balance." Evelyn watched the transaction with growing understanding. This was how it worked. Porter had his fingers in everything, squeezing a little here, adding a fee there, until the whole town was caught in a net they didn't even see. Cole paid the inflated balance without another word. His face had gone carefully blank, the expression of a man used to swallowing rage. They loaded the supplies into the wagon: flour, salt, coffee, a few tins of beans. Necessities, nothing extra. Evelyn climbed up onto the seat beside Cole, and they rolled out of Red Hollow, heading northwest into open country. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Rolling hills covered in brown grass, stands of pine on the higher slopes, and everywhere the sense of space that was both freedom and exposure. Evelyn had lived her whole life in cities where buildings crowded together like teeth in a jaw. Out here, the sky went on forever. "It's different than Philadelphia?" Cole finally broke the silence. "I'm not actually from Philadelphia." "Baltimore?" She glanced at him sharply. "How did you know?" "Your accent. You drop your R's sometimes. Baltimore does that." He kept his eyes on the road. "My wife was from Maryland, Frederick." "I'm sorry about your wife." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "Sarah was good at this. The ranch, I mean. She could look at the books and tell you exactly where we stood, what we could afford, what we couldn't. After she died, I tried to keep it up, but numbers and me—" He shook his head. "I can birth a calf and fix a fence and break a horse, but bookkeeping might as well be Chinese." "I'm good with numbers," Evelyn said. "My father was a clerk. He taught me accounting before he died." "How old were you?" 12. Cole nodded, like that explained something. Maybe it did. The ranch appeared gradually. First a line of fence posts, then a barn that needed new paint, then a house that sat low and sturdy against the wind. It wasn't much. Single story, wood construction, probably 3 or 4 rooms total, but it looked solid, built by someone who knew what they were doing. "Home," Cole said, without inflection. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands rough and impersonal on her waist. Up close, Evelyn could smell horse and leather and wood smoke on him. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Inside, the house was neat but sparse. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and 2 doors that probably led to bedrooms. Everything was clean but worn, the furniture handmade and practical. "You'll take the main bedroom," Cole said, already moving to unload supplies. "I've been sleeping in the back room. Easier to keep it warm." "We should probably discuss. We're married legal, but we don't know each other." He cut her off, not unkindly. "I'm not expecting anything except help with the ranch and the books. The rest, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't." Evelyn felt something unknot in her chest that she hadn't realized was there. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the account books." He brought them out after dinner, a silent meal of beans and cornbread that Evelyn cooked while Cole tended to the livestock. There were 3 ledgers, all in a woman's careful handwriting, and 2 boxes of loose papers. Evelyn spread everything across the kitchen table and started reading. Sarah Mercer had been meticulous. Every transaction documented, every expense categorized, every payment recorded with the date and amount. The ledgers told the story of a ranch that had been profitable 3 years ago, breaking even 2 years ago, and sliding steadily into debt for the past 18 months. "When did the drought start?" Evelyn asked. Cole sat across from her, hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "Last June." "And you took out the loan in August?" "September. Needed to buy feed for the winter and the cattle prices were down." Evelyn pulled out the loan documents. The contract was standard enough. 640 acres of grazing land as collateral, 10% annual interest, payable quarterly. Cole's signature was at the bottom, witnessed by Samuel Porter. Then she found the payment schedule Porter had sent 3 months ago. The numbers were wrong. Not obviously wrong, but wrong enough that someone who knew what to look for would see it. The interest was being calculated at 13%, not 10%, and there were fees, processing fees, late fees, administrative fees, that added up to another 2%. Cole, this contract says 10% interest. That's what Porter quoted me. But he's charging you 15%. She showed him the payment schedule. Look, the principal was $800. At 10% annually, you should owe $80 in interest by the end of the first year. But he's demanding $120. Cole leaned forward, studying the numbers. Son of a bitch. There's more. These fees, there's nothing in the contract that authorizes them. He's just adding charges and claiming they're legitimate. Can we prove it? We have the original contract, but Porter could claim you misunderstood the terms or that there was a verbal agreement for the fees. He'd be lying. Yes, but it would be your word against his, and he owns half the town. Evelyn sat back, thinking. We need more. We need to find out if he's done this to anyone else. Cole was quiet, his expression dark. Jacobson, he said finally. Frank Jacobson had a ranch about 15 miles south. Took out a loan from Porter 2 years ago. Lost the place 6 months later when he couldn't make payments. There were rumors he'd drunk the money away, but Frank wasn't a drinking man. Are there others? 3 that I know of, maybe more. Evelyn looked down at the papers spread across the table. This was bigger than one altered loan. This was systematic. Porter was strangling this whole valley, one ranch at a time. I need to talk to them, she said. The ones who lost their land, find out what their loan terms were, whether they kept any paperwork. Porter will know if you start asking questions. Then we'll have to be careful. She met Cole's gaze. But we have to do something. If we don't stop him, you'll lose this ranch, and everyone else will keep losing until there's nothing left but Porter's empire. Cole looked at her for a long moment, and Evelyn had the strange sense that he was seeing her, actually seeing her, for the first time since she'd stepped off that train. You're not what I expected, he said. Is that good or bad? Haven't decided yet. But there was something in his voice that might have been the beginning of respect. We'll start tomorrow. There's a widow named Margaret Chen who runs a boarding house in Copper Creek. Her husband lost his ranch to Porter last year. If anyone would talk, it's her. That night, Evelyn lay in Sarah Mercer's bed, in Sarah Mercer's room, wearing one of Sarah Mercer's nightgowns that Cole had pulled from a trunk without meeting her eyes. The bed was comfortable, the quilts were warm, and through the wall she could hear Cole moving around in the other room. She'd married a stranger, stolen a dead woman's name, and then traded it for another dead woman's life. She should have felt guilty. Instead, she felt this first stirring of something that might have been purpose. Samuel Porter had built his empire on the assumption that people wouldn't fight back, that they wouldn't understand the numbers, wouldn't keep the records, wouldn't have the will or the knowledge to challenge him. He'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated what a desperate woman with nothing left to lose could do when you gave her something worth fighting for. Evelyn pulled the quilt up to her chin and stared at the dark ceiling. Outside, the wind howled across the empty prairie. Inside, for the first time in months, she started making plans. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sound of Cole already moving around outside. Evelyn dressed quickly in the cold room, her breath fogging in the air. The dress she'd worn yesterday was the only one suitable for travel, so she put it back on and tried not to think about how few possessions she actually owned. In the kitchen, Cole had left bread and butter on the table along with a pot of coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. A note sat beside the plate, written in crude block letters. Gone to check fence line. Back by noon. She ate standing at the window, watching the sun climb over the distant mountains. The ranch looked different in daylight, smaller and more vulnerable. The barn needed repairs. The fences sagged in places. Even the house, solid as it was, showed signs of neglect in the peeling paint and loose boards on the porch. This was what $800 in debt looked like. Evelyn finished her coffee and went back to the account books. In daylight, the pattern became clearer. Sarah Mercer's final entries dated from 5 years ago, right before she died. After that, Cole had tried to maintain the records, but his entries were sporadic and sometimes illegible. For the past 18 months, there was almost nothing, just a few scrawled notes about cattle sales and supply purchases. The loan documents told a different story. Porter had been meticulous. Every payment was recorded, every fee documented, every missed deadline noted with precision. It was the kind of record-keeping that looked legitimate until you started comparing it against the original contract. She was still working when Cole returned, leading his horse into the barn. Evelyn grabbed her shawl and went out to meet him. "Find anything?" he asked, not looking up from unsaddling the gelding. "Questions mostly. Your fence line, how much of it borders other properties?" "North side runs along what used to be the Jacobson place. East side is open range. South touches the Chen property, or what's left of it. West is territorial land. And Porter owns the Jacobson ranch now. Bought it at auction after Frank defaulted, paid about half what it was worth. Cole pulled the saddle off and hefted it onto a rack. Same thing happened to the Chens. Porter bought their place for pennies and turned around and leased it back to Margaret for twice what the mortgage payments would have been. That's not legal. Sure it is. He bought the property fair and square at a public auction. What he does with it after that is his business. Evelyn watched him work, noting the careful way he moved, favoring his left side. "You're hurt. Horse threw me last week. Bruised ribs, nothing serious. Did you see a doctor?" "Can't afford a doctor." He said it matter of fact, without self-pity. "It'll heal." She wanted to argue but recognized the futility. Instead, she changed tactics. "We should go to Copper Creek today. Talk to Margaret Chen." Cole paused, his hand stilling on the brush he'd picked up. "Porter will hear about it." "Probably, but what's he going to do? We're legally married. I have every right to visit neighbors." "You don't know him like I do. Samuel Porter doesn't like being questioned, and he really doesn't like being threatened." "Then we won't threaten him. We'll just gather information." Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice even though there was no one around to hear. "Cole, if we do nothing, you lose this ranch. That's not a possibility. It's a certainty. At least this way, we have a chance." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing risk against certain ruin. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this careful. No accusations, no confrontations, just questions." They took the wagon to Copper Creek, a settlement even smaller than Red Hollow, just a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads. Margaret Chen's boarding house was easy to spot, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but was kept scrupulously clean. Margaret herself answered the door. She was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 40, with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that had seen too much disappointment to be surprised by more. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, recognizing Cole, "I heard you'd gotten married. This must be your wife." "Evelyn," she said, offering her hand. "I was hoping we could talk." Margaret's expression shifted, something wary sliding into place. "About what?" "Your husband's ranch, the loan from First Bank." The door started to close. Cole caught it with his boot. "Please," he said quietly, "we're not here to cause trouble. We just need to understand what happened." Margaret looked between them, her face tight with old anger. "What happened is my husband worked himself to death trying to make payments on a loan that kept growing no matter how much we paid. What happened is Samuel Porter smiled and offered sympathy while he bled us dry. What happened is I'm now running a boarding house on land I used to own, paying rent to the man who stole it." "Did you keep any of the paperwork?" Evelyn asked. "The original loan documents?" "Why? So you can do what? Porter owns the sheriff. He owns the judge. He owns every business in 3 counties that matters. Having proof doesn't mean having justice." "It's a start," Evelyn said. Margaret studied her with sharp eyes. "You're not from here." "No. And you think you can come in and fix what's broken?" "I think I can try." Something in Margaret's expression cracked, just a little. "Wait here." She disappeared into the house and came back 5 minutes later with a wooden box. Inside were papers, loan documents, payment receipts, letters from the bank, all of it carefully preserved. "My husband kept everything," Margaret said. "He was convinced that if he could just prove Porter was cheating us, someone would listen. He died still believing that." Evelyn took the box with careful hands. "May I borrow these? I'll return them within a week. Keep them. I don't need more reminders of what I lost." Margaret's voice was bitter. "But Mrs. Mercer, Evelyn, be careful. Samuel Porter doesn't like being crossed. My husband tried to challenge him. 3 months later, John was dead. Heart attack, the doctor said. But John's heart was fine until Porter decided it wasn't. Cole's jaw tightened. You think Porter killed him? I think Porter is very good at making problems disappear in ways that look natural. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself. I'm telling you this because you seem like decent people, but decent doesn't survive what Porter can do. So be smart and be very, very careful. They drove back to the ranch in silence. The box of papers sat between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. Evelyn's mind was racing, fitting pieces together, seeing the shape of Porter's operation more clearly. She thinks he killed her husband, Cole finally said. Yes. Do you believe her? Evelyn thought about that. About the cold calculation in Porter's eyes, the way he'd looked at her on the train platform like she was a problem to be managed. I believe he's capable of it. Cole's hands tightened on the reins. Then maybe we should drop this. I can sell the ranch, take what I can get, and move on. It's not worth dying over. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What's smart matters. And running is smart? Running is survival. He glanced at her. You should understand that better than anyone. The words hit harder than he probably meant them to. Evelyn felt them land, felt the truth of them settle into her bones. You're right, she said quietly. I ran from Baltimore. I ran from my debts and my past and everything I couldn't face. And it got me here. Married to a stranger, hiding behind another woman's name, still running. That's not what I... But here's the thing about running, Cole. Eventually, you run out of places to go, and then you either fight or you die. Those are the only choices left. He didn't answer, but he didn't turn the wagon around either. Back at the ranch, Evelyn spread Margaret Chen's papers across the kitchen table next to Cole's documents. The pattern was there, clear as daylight once you knew what to look for. John Chen's original loan had been for $600 at 9% interest. His payment schedule showed charges of 12% plus fees, the same fees that appeared in Cole's documents, processing charges, administrative costs, late penalties that accumulated even when payments were made on time. He did it to both of you, Evelyn said, pointing to the numbers. Same method, same fees, same lies. Cole leaned over her shoulder, following her finger. How much did it cost them? She did the math quickly in her head. Over the 2 years they had the loan, an extra $240 minimum. Money that should have gone to principal went to fraudulent fees instead. And when they couldn't pay, Porter foreclosed, bought the property at auction for a fraction of its value, then leased it back to Margaret at inflated rates. Evelyn sat back feeling sick. It's brilliant, in a horrible way. He's not just lending money, he's acquiring property. Every ranch he forces into default becomes part of his empire. How many others? Cole's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. I don't know, but Margaret mentioned other families. The Jacobsons weren't the first. We need to find them, get their documents. That's going to draw attention. Let it. Cole straightened, and for the first time since she'd met him, Evelyn saw something other than exhaustion in his eyes. Anger, yes, but also determination. Porter's been doing this for years, and nobody's stopped him because everyone's too scared or too broken to fight. Maybe it's time someone did. Over the next 3 days, they visited 5 more families. Some had lost their ranches. Others were still fighting, making payments they couldn't afford on loans they didn't fully understand. All of them had the same story. Samuel Porter offering help, then slowly tightening the noose. A man named Dutch Keller, who'd lost his cattle operation 2 years ago, gave them his documents and a warning. Porter's got the sheriff in his pocket. Don't expect legal help from that quarter. A widow named Sarah Boone, struggling to maintain her late husband's sheep ranch, showed them payment receipts that didn't match her loan terms. I asked Porter about the discrepancies, she said. He told me I must have misunderstood. Made me feel stupid for questioning him. An elderly rancher named Tom Wickham, barely hanging on to his property, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and poured drinks with shaking hands. I've got 6 months before the bank takes everything. My grandfather homesteaded this land. My father built it up. And I'm going to lose it because I needed $800 to get through a bad winter. Each visit added to the pile of evidence on Evelyn's kitchen table. Each story built the case against Porter, brick by careful brick. But evidence and justice were two different things, as Margaret had pointed out. On the fourth day, Cole rode into Red Hollow for supplies while Evelyn stayed at the ranch, organizing the documents into something approaching a legal case. She'd just finished cross-referencing loan terms when she heard a horse approaching. Through the window, she saw Samuel Porter riding up to the house. Her first instinct was to lock the door. Her second was to grab the shotgun she'd seen Cole keep by the fireplace. She did neither. Instead, she smoothed her skirt, took a breath, and opened the door before Porter could knock. "Mr. Porter, this is unexpected." He sat his horse with the ease of a man who'd never done a day's hard labor. "Mrs. Mercer, I hope I'm not intruding. My husband is in town." "Yes, I know. I saw him at the general store." Porter dismounted, tying his horse to the porch rail without being invited. "I actually came to speak with you." Evelyn didn't step back to let him in. "About what?" "About the questions you've been asking, the visits you've been making." His smile was pleasant, conversational. "You've been very busy for someone who just arrived." "I'm getting to know my neighbors." "Are you?" Porter's eyes were cold. "Or are you gathering information to make accusations you can't prove?" "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." He took a step closer, not threatening exactly, but definitely intimidating. "You're an intelligent woman, Mrs. Mercer. I could tell that from the moment I met you, but intelligence without wisdom is dangerous." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice, from someone who's lived in this territory long enough to understand how things work." Porter glanced toward the house, and Evelyn realized with cold certainty that he could see the papers spread across her kitchen table through the open door. Red Hollow is a small community. It survives because people understand their place in it. The bank provides capital. Ranchers provide labor. Everyone benefits when everyone cooperates. And when they don't cooperate, Porter's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Then the system corrects itself. Ranchers who can't manage their finances lose their ranches. That's not cruelty. It's economics. It's fraud when you alter loan terms after contracts are signed. The words were out before Evelyn could stop them. She saw Porter's mask slip just for a second, saw the calculation underneath. "That's a serious accusation," he said quietly. "The kind that requires proof. The kind that ruins reputations if it can't be substantiated." "I have proof." "Do you?" He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes. Not warmth, something colder, satisfaction. "Papers can be forged, Mrs. Mercer. Documents can be misunderstood. And a woman with debts back east, traveling under a false name, making accusations against a respected businessman, well, who do you think people will believe?" The bottom dropped out of Evelyn's stomach. He knew. Somehow he knew about Baltimore, about the debts, about everything she'd tried to leave behind. Porter saw her reaction and nodded. "I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. You're not Evelyn Turner from Philadelphia. You're Evelyn Cross from Baltimore, and you have creditors who'd be very interested to know where you are." "How did you—" "I have resources, connections." He adjusted his gloves, casual as discussing the weather. "But I'm not an unreasonable man. You want a fresh start. I can appreciate that. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to return all those documents you've collected. You're going to stop asking questions, and you and Cole are going to focus on running your ranch and making your loan payments on time. And if I don't, then I'll make sure your creditors know exactly where to find you. And I'll make sure the territorial court knows that Cole's marriage is based on fraud. Fraudulent identity, fraudulent contract, fraudulent everything. They'll annul it. You'll be arrested for debt evasion. And Cole will lose his ranch anyway, but without the benefit of a wife who can do arithmetic." Porter let that sink in, watching her face. "Or," he continued, "you can be smart. Accept that some fights aren't worth having. Live your life such as it is. I'll even be generous. I'll reduce Cole's interest rate to the original 10%. All those extra fees? Forgiven. Clean slate. It was a good offer. A smart offer. The kind of deal that someone who understood survival should take." Evelyn looked at Porter, at his expensive coat and his cold eyes, and his absolute certainty that she would fold. She thought about Baltimore, about running, about all the times she'd chosen safety over everything else. "No," she said. Porter's expression hardened. "Excuse me? I said no. You can tell my creditors where I am. You can try to annul my marriage. But I'm not returning those documents, and I'm not stopping. You're making a mistake." Probably, but it's my mistake to make. For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then Porter smiled, a real smile this time, with teeth. Your funeral, he said softly. Literally, if you're not careful. Ask Margaret Chen about being careful. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Evelyn watched him go, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it. She'd just declared war on the most powerful man in the valley. With no plan, no resources, and no idea if she could win, Cole found her an hour later, still standing in the doorway. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him everything, Porter's visit, his threats, his knowledge of her past. All of it. When she finished, Cole was quiet for a long time. He offered to reduce the interest, he finally said. Forgive the fees. Yes. That would save the ranch. Yes. But you said no. I said no. Cole looked at her and Evelyn couldn't read his expression. Anger? Relief? Resignation? Why? He asked. She'd been asking herself the same question. Why risk everything? Why fight a battle she'd probably lose? Why choose danger over the safe, smart option? Because I'm tired of running, she said simply. And because if we let him get away with this, he'll keep doing it. To us, to everyone. Someone has to stop him. Even if it gets us killed? Even then. Cole nodded slowly. Then to her surprise, he smiled. It was a small smile, worn and weary, but genuine. Sarah would have liked you, he said. She hated bullies. I'm not brave like she was. I don't know what I am. You're here. That's enough. He looked toward the house at the papers visible through the door. So what do we do now? Evelyn took a breath. We build a case so solid that Porter can't talk his way out of it. We find every victim, document every fraudulent charge, prove the pattern. And then we take it somewhere Porter doesn't control. Where's that? I don't know yet, but there has to be somewhere. A territorial court, a federal judge, someone who isn't in his pocket. That's a lot of faith in a system that hasn't helped anyone yet. You have a better idea? Cole shook his head. No, but I have this. He pulled out a worn leather journal from his coat. Sarah's diary. I never read it after she died. Seemed wrong. But maybe there's something in here. She was always writing things down, observations about people, about the town. Evelyn took the journal with careful hands. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed. Sarah Mercer's handwriting was small and precise, covering page after page with thoughts and observations and the daily minutiae of ranch life. And buried in those pages, Evelyn found gold. Sarah had suspected Porter. Not proof exactly, but suspicions documented over years. Notes about conversations she'd overheard, patterns she'd noticed, discrepancies in town records that didn't add up. One entry dated 2 months before she died made Evelyn's breath catch. Samuel Porter visited today asking about our loan arrangements with the Territorial Bank. Seemed very interested in when our note came due. Cole doesn't see it, but I do. Porter is circling, waiting for weakness. He did the same thing with the Jacobsons before Frank lost everything. I need to make sure our records are perfect, every payment documented, every receipt saved. If something happens to me, Cole will need proof. Porter counts on people not keeping records. She knew, Evelyn said, showing Cole the entry. She was building a case. Cole read it, his jaw working. She never told me. Maybe she didn't want to worry you, or maybe she ran out of time. They spent the rest of the evening going through Sarah's diary, cross-referencing her observations with the loan documents they'd collected. What emerged was a timeline spanning 5 years, Porter slowly taking over the valley, one ranch at a time, using the same tactics refined to near perfection. He's been doing this since before the bank even existed, Evelyn said, pointing to an early entry. Sarah mentions him working as a loan broker for the Territorial Bank, arranging financing for homesteaders. He must have learned the system from the inside, saw the opportunities for fraud, and then opened his own bank to make it easier. Exactly. No oversight, no competition. He controls the entire financial system within 100 miles. Cole leaned back in his chair, exhaustion written in every line of his face. Even if we prove all this, who do we take it to? That was the question Evelyn had been avoiding. Porter owned the local law. He had connections throughout the territory. Any judge within riding distance was either in his pocket or too intimidated to act. We need to go higher, she said slowly. Federal court, Denver maybe, or even Washington. That's weeks of travel, months maybe, and it costs money we don't have. Then we find the money. How? Evelyn looked at the papers spread across the table. Evidence of systematic fraud affecting dozens of families, hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen over years. We make Porter's victims into plaintiffs, pool resources. If everyone who's been cheated contributes even a small amount, we might have enough. You're talking about organizing people who are barely surviving, people who are terrified of Porter. I'm talking about giving them a choice. Keep being victims or fight back. Cole studied her in the lamplight. You really think this can work? I think it's the only chance we have. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We don't tell anyone the full plan until we're ready to move. Can't risk Porter finding out and stopping us before we start. Over the next week, they worked in careful secrecy. During the day, Cole maintained the ranch, making a show of normal operations. At night, Evelyn organized the evidence, creating detailed spreadsheets showing each fraudulent transaction, each altered term, each victim of Porter's system. She also started drafting a legal complaint. Her father had taught her the basics of contract law before he died, and she'd picked up more working for a law clerk in Baltimore before the debts became overwhelming. It wasn't much, but it was enough to construct a framework. The hard part was staying quiet. Every time they went to town, Porter's eyes followed them. Every transaction felt watched. The pressure built day by day, a constant awareness that one wrong move would bring everything crashing down. Then, on a cold morning in early March, everything changed. Cole came back from checking the north fence line riding hard, his face grim. Porter's men are on the Jacobson property, he said, swinging down from his horse. Putting up new fences, running them 20 feet onto my land. He's pushing the boundary? Not pushing, taking, and he's doing it openly like he's daring me to object. Evelyn's mind raced. This was provocation, clear and simple. Porter testing them, seeing if they'd fight or fold. What do you want to do? She asked. Cole's expression was hard. I want to ride over there and tear those fences down. But that's probably exactly what he wants. Give him an excuse to involve the sheriff, claim I'm trespassing or destroying property. So we don't take the bait. We document it instead. Evelyn grabbed paper and pencil. Show me exactly where the fences are. I'll draw a map, note the date, make it part of the official record. They spent the afternoon surveying the boundary, marking where Porter's new fences crossed onto Mercer land. It was a clear violation, easily provable with the territorial survey maps Sarah had kept filed away. But proof and justice, as Evelyn kept learning, were two different things. That night they heard horses approaching in the dark. Cole grabbed his rifle, and Evelyn blew out the lamps. Through the window, they watched 4 riders circle the house, not stopping, just making their presence known. Porter's men, Cole whispered, sending a message. The riders left without incident, but the message was clear. Porter knew what they were doing, and he was done being patient. Evelyn didn't sleep after the riders left. She sat at the kitchen table with Sarah's diary and a fresh pot of coffee, rereading entries by lamplight until her eyes burned. There had to be something she was missing, some detail that would crack this open. Cole finally emerged from his room around 4 in the morning, fully dressed. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Kept thinking about those fences. He poured coffee, his movements stiff. The bruised ribs were healing slow. Porter's escalating. The threats weren't working, so now he's taking what he wants and daring us to stop him. Which means we're getting close to something that scares him. Or he's just tired of waiting for us to give up. Cole sat across from her, cupping the mug in both hands. I've been thinking, maybe we should take his offer. Reduced interest, forgiven fees. It's more than most people get. Evelyn looked at him, searching for what was underneath the words. You don't believe that. No, but I also don't want to get you killed because I was too stubborn to know when I was beat. This isn't about stubbornness. It's about... She stopped, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. I spent 2 years in Baltimore watching my mother die by inches, watching creditors circle like vultures, running from every knock on the door. And you know what I learned? Fear doesn't keep you safe. It just makes the cage smaller. Cole was quiet for a moment. My wife used to say something similar. You can't negotiate with wolves. She meant Porter, meant men like him who see compromise as weakness. She was right. She was also dead at 38. The words came out flat, brutal. Heart fever, the doctor said, but she'd been working herself to exhaustion trying to keep the ranch afloat, trying to stay ahead of Porter's games. So maybe being right isn't enough. Evelyn felt the weight of that, the grief underneath. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Neither of us signed up for what we got. He met her eyes. But we're here anyway. So the question is, what do we do about it? Before Evelyn could answer, they heard a sound outside. Not horses this time. Footsteps on the porch, quick and light. Cole grabbed his rifle. Evelyn moved to the window. A woman stood on the porch, hunched against the cold. Young, maybe 25, with a shawl pulled over her head. She knocked again, harder this time. Cole opened the door with the rifle visible but not aimed. Can I help you? Are you the ones asking questions about the bank? The woman's voice was thin with cold and fear. About Mr. Porter? Who's asking? My name's Rebecca Marsh. My husband and I have a homestead 15 miles east. We took a loan last fall to buy seed and equipment. She was shaking, and not just from temperature. Mr. Porter came by yesterday, said we were 3 months behind on payments, but we're not. I keep the books. I know what we've paid. Evelyn stepped forward. Come inside. You're freezing. Rebecca hesitated, then crossed the threshold. In the lamplight, Evelyn could see she was younger than she'd first appeared, with the kind of worn-down exhaustion that came from too many late nights and not enough food. Cole lowered the rifle. How did you find us? Margaret Chen. I went to her because I didn't know where else to go, and she said you were collecting evidence, said you might be able to help. Rebecca pulled a folded paper from inside her shawl. This is our loan agreement, 10% interest due quarterly, but Porter's demanding payments based on 15%, and when I showed him our contract, he said I must be confused about the terms. Evelyn took the paper, unfolding it carefully. The contract was identical to the others. Same language, same terms, same signatures. And when Rebecca pulled out the payment schedule Porter had sent, the same fraudulent fees appeared. How much do you owe? Evelyn asked. Principal was $400. We've paid back $210. Should have the whole thing cleared in another year. Rebecca's voice cracked. But Porter says we still owe $340. He's threatening to foreclose if we don't pay the difference by the end of the month. That's impossible on those numbers, Cole said, looking over Evelyn's shoulder. Even with his inflated interest, you should owe less than $200. I know, but what can I do? He owns the bank. He has all the records. Who's going to believe me? Evelyn set the papers on the table next to all the others. Another victim. Another family being crushed by Porter's system. The pile of evidence was growing, but so was the urgency. Porter wasn't just maintaining his empire anymore. He was accelerating, squeezing harder, moving faster. We're building a case, Evelyn said, gathering documentation from everyone he's defrauded. When we have enough, we're taking it to federal court. Rebecca's expression flickered between hope and disbelief. The territorial judges won't touch Porter. Everyone knows that. We're not going to territorial court. We're going over their heads. That takes money. Lawyers, travel expenses. I don't have anything to contribute. We barely have enough to eat. Then contribute your story, your documents. That's what we need. Evelyn pulled out the spreadsheet she'd been building, showing Rebecca where she fit in the pattern. You're the 11th family we've documented. Porter's stolen at least $3,000 through fraudulent fees alone, probably more. That's enough to catch federal attention. If they'll listen when we show them this. Evelyn gestured at the papers covering the table. Every loan altered, every fee fabricated, every family destroyed. This isn't just fraud, it's systematic theft on a scale that can't be ignored. Rebecca looked at the evidence, then at Evelyn and Cole. You really think you can beat him? I think we can try, Cole said. That's more than anyone else has done. Rebecca nodded slowly. All right, whatever you need from me, you have it, but be careful. Porter doesn't just ruin people financially, he destroys them completely. After Rebecca left, promising to spread the word to other families who might have evidence, Evelyn and Cole sat in silence, watching dawn break over the mountains. We need to move faster, Evelyn finally said. Porter's pushing because he knows we're onto something. If we wait too long, he'll find a way to stop us. How much faster? I need 3 days, maybe 4, to organize all this into something a federal prosecutor can use. Cole rubbed his face, exhaustion showing through. And then what? We can't just ride into Denver with a stack of papers and expect someone to care. No, we need someone with authority to file the complaint on our behalf. A territorial attorney, maybe, or a federal marshal. Potter owns every attorney within 100 miles. Then we find one he doesn't own. Evelyn was thinking out loud now, sorting through options. What about the territorial capital? Helena? That's a week's ride north, and Porter has connections there too. But not control, not the same absolute power he has here. She turned to face him. We need to split up. You stay here, maintain appearances, keep the ranch running. I'll take the evidence to Helena. Find someone who will listen. Absolutely not. Cole's voice was hard. You're not riding alone for a week through territory you don't know, carrying documents that could get you killed if Porter finds out. Then what's your alternative? We both go. Leave the ranch. It's not worth dying for. And if we leave, Porter wins. He gets your land, and everyone else who's counting on us gets nothing. Evelyn shook her head. No, someone has to stay, and it should be you. This is your home. You're my wife. That makes it your home too. The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had acknowledged the marriage as anything more than a legal convenience. Cole, I'm not sending you alone into danger, so I can sit here waiting to see if you come back. His jaw was set, stubborn. We find another way. Before Evelyn could argue, they heard more horses. Multiple riders this time, coming fast. Cole grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. 6 men, Porter's in front. Evelyn's heart hammered. This was it. Porter was done with subtle threats. She quickly gathered the most important documents, the loan contracts, the payment schedules, Sarah's diary, and stuffed them into a leather satchel. If things go bad, you run. Get these to Helena. I'm not running. Cole, I said I'm not running. The riders pulled up in the yard. Porter dismounted with theatrical slowness, flanked by men who were clearly hired muscle. The sheriff was there too, a weak-chinned man named Davies who'd never met Porter's eyes. Cole opened the door before they could knock. Samuel, to what do I owe the pleasure? Porter's smile was cold. I'm here on official business. Sheriff Davies has a warrant for your arrest. On what charge? Theft. You've been removing fence posts from the Jacobson property. That's my property now, which makes it stealing. Those fence posts were on my land. I have survey maps proving it. I have survey maps that say different. Porter gestured to Davies. Show him the warrant. The sheriff stepped forward, holding out a folded paper with visible reluctance. I'm sorry, Cole. I gotta do this. Cole took the warrant, read it slowly. Evelyn watched his jaw tighten as he worked through the legal language. This says I removed property valued at over $50. That's a felony charge. 20 fence posts at $3 each. The math works out. Porter's expression was satisfied. You'll be held in Red Hollow until the circuit judge arrives. Trial should be in about 6 weeks. Oops, 6 weeks. Long enough for Porter to finish whatever he was planning. Long enough to make the evidence disappear, intimidate witnesses, consolidate control. This is ridiculous, Evelyn said, stepping forward. Those fence posts were on our property. Mr. Mercer was protecting his own land. Porter finally looked at her, and the cold calculation in his eyes made her skin crawl. Mrs. Mercer, I'd be careful about making accusations you can't prove. Wouldn't want to join your husband in a cell. You can't arrest me. I haven't done anything. Haven't you? Porter pulled out another folded paper. I have a telegram here from Baltimore. Seems there's a woman named Evelyn Cross wanted for debt evasion. The description matches you perfectly. The world tilted. Evelyn felt Cole tense beside her, felt the weight of Porter's trap closing around them both. I don't know what you're talking about, she managed. Of course not. That's why the Baltimore authorities sent a warrant. They're very interested in recovering the $340 you owe various creditors. Porter's smile widened. Sheriff Davies could arrest you right now. Have you on a train back to Maryland by week's end. Unless, of course, you're reasonable. There it was. The real play. Porter hadn't come to arrest Cole. He'd come to force their surrender. What do you want? Cole asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Simple. You sign over the ranch, voluntarily. In exchange, I drop the theft charges and forget all about Mrs. Mercer's unfortunate past. Porter spread his hands. Everyone wins. You get to leave with your freedom, and I get the property I should have bought months ago when you first defaulted. We're not in default. That's a matter of interpretation. My records say different. Evelyn's mind raced. If they refused, Cole went to jail and she got shipped back to Baltimore. If they accepted, Porter got the ranch and their evidence became meaningless. Who would believe two people who'd just surrendered to fraud charges? But there was a third option. Risky, probably stupid, but it was there. I want to see your records, Evelyn said. Porter blinked. Excuse me? Your bank records, the originals. You say we're in default. Prove it. I don't need to prove anything to you. Actually, you do. Evelyn pulled out the loan contract, holding it up. This is a legal document. If there's a dispute about payments, you're required to provide documentation. Montana Territorial Law, Section 42, subsection 7. She was bluffing. She had no idea if that law existed. But Porter's expression flickered, just for a second, and she knew she'd hit something. Mrs. Mercer, you're not a lawyer. No, but I can read, and I know that before you can foreclose on a property, you need to prove the debt in front of a judge, which means providing your records for examination. Porter's smile thinned. This isn't a foreclosure hearing. No, it's a theft charge based on a property boundary dispute, which means you need to prove ownership of the disputed land, which means providing the documentation showing you legally acquired the Jacobson property, which means proving Frank Jacobson was legitimately in default when you foreclosed. Evelyn was building the argument as she went, pulling on half-remembered legal principles and sheer nerve. I want to see all of it, every contract, every payment record, every deed transfer, because if you can't prove the Jacobson foreclosure was legitimate, then that's not your property Cole took fence posts from. It's still Frank's. The silence that followed was deafening. Porter's men shifted uneasily. Sheriff Davies looked confused, and Porter himself had gone very still, the pleasant mask slipping to show the predator underneath. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Mercer. No, I'm demanding my legal rights, unless you're saying territorial law doesn't apply to you. Cole caught on to what she was doing. She's right, Samuel. Before you arrest me, you need to prove those fence posts were on your property. And to do that, you need to show the court your acquisition of the Jacobson ranch was legal. Porter's jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. Then it should be easy to provide the documentation. Evelyn kept her voice level, professional. Unless there's a reason you don't want those records examined. For a long moment, Porter just stared at her. Then he turned to Davies. We'll postpone the arrest until I can gather the necessary paperwork. Shouldn't take more than a few days. Mr. Porter, the warrant, I said postpone it, Davies. The sheriff nodded quickly, relieved to escape the confrontation. Porter mounted his horse, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. You just made a very serious mistake, Mrs. Mercer. We'll see. He rode off with his men, leaving Evelyn and Cole standing in the yard. As soon as they were out of sight, Evelyn's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the porch step. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Cole said, sitting beside her. Haven't decided which. Probably both. Her hands were shaking. But it bought us time. A few days at least. Time for what? To us. It was to do what we should have done from the start. Evelyn stood, forcing her legs to steady. We stop gathering evidence and start using it. Today. Right now. How? She looked toward Red Hollow, invisible beyond the hills, but present in her mind like a weight. We go directly to Porter's bank. We demand to see his records, and we do it publicly, where people can see. Cole stared at her. That's insane. He'll never allow it. He doesn't have a choice. I just challenged him on legal grounds in front of a sheriff. If he refuses now, it looks like he's hiding something. His whole empire is built on the appearance of legitimacy. Take that away, and it all falls apart. And if he calls your bluff? If he just has Davies arrest us anyway? Then we make sure everyone sees it happen. Make sure every rancher, every family he's defrauded, knows that Porter is so afraid of his own records being examined that he'd rather make a public spectacle of arresting people than show his books. Evelyn's mind was racing now, seeing the pieces fall into place. Porter's power comes from fear and isolation. He keeps people separated, makes them think they're alone. But if we can get them together, show them they're not the only ones being cheated. You want to turn this into a public confrontation. I want to turn it into a trial. Right there in Red Hollow, in front of everyone. Either Porter opens his books and we expose the fraud, or he refuses and exposes himself. Cole was quiet, thinking it through. That's a hell of a gamble. Everything about this has been a gamble. She looked at him. But we're out of time for careful moves. Porter's escalating. The next time he comes here, he won't bother with warrants. You're talking about going into town, walking into his bank, and demanding to see records he'll never voluntarily show us. Yes. Could get us killed. Probably. Cole let out a long breath, then stood. All right. But we do this smart. We get witnesses first. People who'll see what happens and spread the word if things go wrong. Over the next 2 hours, they rode to every nearby ranch, every homestead within 10 miles. Dutch Keller agreed to come immediately. Sarah Boone hitched up her wagon. Tom Wickham rode into town despite his age, saying he'd waited his whole life to see someone stand up to Porter. By noon, 15 people had gathered at the general store in Red Hollow. Not an army, but enough. Enough to witness, enough to spread word if things went bad. Wilson, the store owner, looked terrified. Mr. Mercer, I don't want trouble. There won't be any trouble, Cole said. Just citizens exercising their legal rights. Evelyn stood in the middle of the group, the leather satchel heavy with evidence. Her mouth was dry, her heart hammering, but her hands were steady. Everyone here knows why we're doing this, she said, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. More people were gathering, drawn by the unusual assembly. Samuel Porter has been defrauding ranchers for years, altering loan terms, adding false fees, stealing land through fake foreclosures. We have proof, but Porter's threatened to arrest my husband and me if we don't surrender our ranch. So we're going to give him a choice: open his records for public examination, or admit he's got something to hide. A murmur ran through the crowd, fear, hope, disbelief all mixed together. Porter owns the law here, someone called out. What makes you think this'll work? Because he doesn't own federal law, and if he refuses to provide documentation he's legally required to show, that's obstruction, which means federal prosecutors will get involved whether he wants them to or not. Evelyn started walking toward the bank. Cole fell into step beside her, and behind them the crowd followed. The first bank of Red Hollow sat at the end of the street like a monument to Porter's power. 2 stories, fresh paint, windows that reflected the crowd approaching like a dark mirror. Evelyn climbed the steps and pushed open the door. The bank's interior was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, polished wood, a teller's cage that made customers feel small. Porter sat at a desk in the back, and when he looked up and saw the crowd flowing in behind Evelyn, his expression went cold. Mrs. Mercer, I don't recall scheduling an appointment. I'm here to examine the loan records for Cole Mercer, Frank Jacobson, John Chen, and, she pulled out her list, 14 other accounts. Territorial law requires you to provide documentation upon formal request. I'm making that request now. Porter stood slowly. This is private property. You're trespassing. Banks are public trusts, Mr. Porter, and you're required by law to make records available for examination in cases of disputed debt. Evelyn set her satchel on the desk, pulling out contracts. These are the original loan agreements. I want to see your records showing payments received, interest calculations, and fee assessments. Get out. Show us the books, Samuel, Dutch Keller called from the crowd. If everything's legitimate, you got nothing to hide. Porter's gaze swept the room, taking in the faces. More people had crowded in behind them until the bank was packed with bodies and barely suppressed anger. I'm not showing you anything, Porter said, and if you don't leave, I'm having Sheriff Davies arrest every one of you for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Then do it, Evelyn said. Arrest us all, in front of everyone. Let them see what happens when people ask to see their own loan records. Porter's hand moved toward the desk drawer. Cole tensed, and Evelyn realized with cold certainty that Porter had a gun in there. But before he could reach it, a voice from the doorway said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. A man stood in the entrance, tall and weathered, wearing a marshal's badge on his coat. Marshal Garrett, Porter said, recovering quickly. This is a pleasant surprise. Doubt that. The marshal walked into the bank, the crowd parting for him. Got a telegram from the territorial attorney's office in Helena. Seems someone filed a formal complaint about financial fraud in this county. They sent me to investigate. He looked at Evelyn. You must be Mrs. Mercer. Evelyn's mind raced. She hadn't filed anything with Helena, hadn't even sent a telegram. Then she saw Rebecca Marsh at the back of the crowd and understood. The young woman must have ridden through the night to Helena after leaving their ranch, must have found someone willing to listen, must have triggered exactly what Evelyn had been planning. "Yes," she said, "I can show you. Already saw enough." Garrett pulled out a folded paper. "I have a federal warrant to examine the financial records of First Bank of Red Hollow. Mr. Porter, you're required to provide full access to your books. Any refusal will be considered obstruction of a federal investigation." The room went silent. Porter's face had gone white, then red. "This is outrageous. On what grounds?" "Systematic fraud across territorial lines. That makes it federal jurisdiction." Garrett's expression was granite. "Now you can cooperate, or I can arrest you and examine the records anyway. Your choice." Porter looked at the marshal, at Evelyn, at the crowd of witnesses packed into his bank. His empire built on fear and isolation was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it happening. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "The records are in the vault." What they found over the next 3 hours destroyed any pretense of legitimacy Porter had maintained. Ledgers showing one set of numbers for customers and different numbers for actual transactions. Payment records that didn't match receipts. Loan contracts with terms that had been altered after signing. The changes so subtle they were almost invisible. And a separate set of books documenting the real extent of Porter's fraud. Over 40 families cheated. Nearly $15,000 stolen through fraudulent fees and altered terms. Properties worth 10 times that amount seized through fake foreclosures. The crowd watched as Marshal Garrett documented each piece of evidence, his expression growing darker with each page. "Mr. Porter," he finally said, "you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and obstruction. You have the right to remain silent." Porter didn't resist. But as Davies led him out in handcuffs, he looked at Evelyn with such cold hatred that she felt it like a physical blow. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes," Evelyn replied, "it is." The sun was setting by the time Marshal Garrett finished taking statements. The crowd had dispersed slowly, people leaving in ones and twos, talking in hushed voices about what they'd witnessed. Evelyn sat on the bank steps, exhausted beyond measure. Cole sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You did it," he said. "We did it." She leaned against him, too tired to maintain the careful distance they'd kept since the wedding. "I still can't believe Rebecca rode to Helena. She must have left the same night she came to us." "Desperate people do desperate things." Cole's voice was soft. "You taught us that. Taught us we didn't have to stay victims." Evelyn closed her eyes. The weight of the past weeks, the fear, the planning, the constant pressure was finally lifting. They'd won. Porter was arrested. The evidence was secure. But she couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, that cold promise that this wasn't over. "Cole," she said quietly. What he said at the end. "He's going to jail. Whatever else he might try, he can't do it from a cell. He has money, connections, men who'll do what he says." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand, his rough fingers wrapping around hers. "Then we stay careful, watch each other's backs, and we don't let fear make us small again." Evelyn squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the contact. They'd started this as strangers bound by legal convenience. Somewhere along the way, in the fighting, in the fear and the refusal to surrender, they'd become something else. Partners. Maybe more. The future was uncertain. Porter would have a trial. The defrauded families would need to rebuild. The ranch still needed work, and winter was coming again. But for now, watching the sun set over Red Hollow, Evelyn let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten was possible. Hope. Hope lasted exactly 3 days. On the third morning after Porter's arrest, Evelyn was feeding chickens when she heard the shot. Single crack of a rifle, distant but clear in the cold air. She dropped the bucket and ran toward the barn where Cole had gone to repair a stall door. He was standing in the doorway, rifle in hand, staring at something in the dirt. "Cole?" He pointed without speaking. 20 feet from the barn, a fence post lay splintered where a bullet had struck it. Fresh wood showed white against the weathered gray. "Warning shot," he said quietly, "from the ridge to the north. Had to be at least 300 yards. Evelyn scanned the horizon but saw nothing. Whoever had fired was long gone, their message delivered. Porter's men, she said. It wasn't a question. Probably, though it could be anyone he paid before they locked him up. Cole lowered the rifle, his jaw tight. We knew this might happen. Knowing doesn't make it easier. They went inside and barred the door, something they hadn't done since that first night. Evelyn tried to continue working on the legal documents Marshal Garrett had asked her to prepare for the prosecution, but her hands kept shaking. Every sound outside made her jump. Cole cleaned his rifle, checked the ammunition, and said nothing. The silence between them felt different now. Not comfortable, but tense with unspoken worry. Around noon, Dutch Keller rode up fast, his horse lathered. Someone burned Tom Wickham's hay barn last night, he said without preamble. Whole thing gone. Tom tried to stop it and got his arm burned bad. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. How bad? Bad enough he might lose the arm if infection sets in. Doc's with him now, but... Dutch shook his head. Tom was one of the loudest voices at the bank that day. Someone wanted to send a message. Has anyone told Marshal Garrett? He's in Helena for the week, presenting evidence to the federal prosecutor. Won't be back until next Tuesday. 5 more days without law enforcement that wasn't in Porter's pocket. Sheriff Davies had made himself scarce since the arrest, avoiding eye contact whenever he saw any of the families who'd testified. We need to organize, Evelyn said. Set up watches, make sure no one's isolated. Already started. Margaret Chen's coordinating from Copper Creek. Got about 20 families willing to help keep eyes out. Dutch looked at Cole. We were hoping you'd take point here in Red Hollow. People trust you. Cole glanced at Evelyn, and she saw the conflict in his expression. Taking a leadership role meant making themselves even bigger targets, but refusing meant leaving everyone vulnerable. I'll do it, Evelyn said. Cole needs to focus on the ranch. I can coordinate from here. Evelyn, it makes sense. I'm better with organization and planning. You're better with the physical work that keeps this place running. She met his eyes. We both contribute what we're good at. Dutch nodded. Fair enough. I'll spread the word. Anyone sees trouble, they report here. We'll set up a relay system, get word out fast if Porter's men make another move. After he left, Cole turned to Evelyn. You know this puts you right in the center of whatever comes next. I'm already there. We both are. She went back to the legal documents, but her mind was elsewhere, running through contingencies, backup plans, ways to protect people who were counting on them. The attacks continued over the next 4 days. Sarah Boone found her sheep scattered across 3 miles of open range, half of them dead from exposure. Someone cut the fence line on the marsh property, letting their cattle wander onto territorial land where they'd be impounded and cost money to retrieve. Rebecca Marsh showed up at the ranch in tears, saying they couldn't afford the impound fees and might lose their entire herd. Evelyn pooled what little money they had with contributions from other families and paid the fees herself. It left them with exactly $7.30. We can't keep doing this, Cole said that night, watching Evelyn count and recount their remaining cash. Every time Porter's men strike, we lose money we don't have. What's the alternative? Let them destroy everything we've built. We haven't built anything yet. We've just stopped Porter from taking more. He sat across from her, exhaustion written deep in the lines of his face. Maybe we should leave. Take what we can carry and head north. Start over somewhere Porter's reach doesn't extend. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. The man who'd been so determined to fight 3 days ago was crumbling under the sustained pressure. She understood. She felt it too, the constant fear, the inability to sleep deeply, the way every sound might be a threat. Is that what you want? She asked quietly. I want you safe. I want to stop looking over my shoulder waiting for the next attack. He rubbed his face. I want a lot of things that aren't going to happen. Cole, he's in jail, Evelyn. We won. But it doesn't feel like winning when we're still under siege. Before she could answer, they heard horses. Multiple riders moving fast. Cole grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Evelyn pulled out the old revolver they'd found in Sarah's desk, checking that it was loaded. But the riders weren't Porter's men. It was Marshal Garrett with 3 other federal marshals riding into the yard with purpose. Cole opened the door, relief visible on his face. Marshal, we weren't expecting you back until Tuesday. Plans changed. Garrett dismounted, his expression grim. We need to talk. All of you who testified. Within an hour, the kitchen was packed with people. Dutch Keller, Margaret Chen, Sarah Boone, Rebecca, and Thomas Marsh, half a dozen others. Everyone who'd stood in that bank and watched Porter's empire collapse. Garrett stood at the head of the table, and his next words hit like a physical blow. Porter made bail. The room erupted, voices overlapping, angry and afraid. How is that possible? Margaret demanded. He stole thousands of dollars. He has a lawyer from Denver, expensive one, argued that Porter's a respected businessman with deep community ties, not a flight risk. Garrett's jaw was tight. The federal judge set bail at $20,000. Porter posted it this morning. $20,000? Dutch's voice was hollow. Where does he get that kind of money? His bank accounts were frozen, but apparently he has investors. People with interests in his properties. Garrett pulled out a document. He's restricted to the territory, has to appear for trial, can't conduct business related to the bank. But he's free until the court date. Evelyn felt the room tilt. Porter was out. Free to move, to plan, to strike at everyone who testified against him. When's the trial? She asked, keeping her voice steady through sheer will. 6 weeks. Federal prosecutor needs time to organize the evidence, bring in witnesses from other territories where Porter did business. 6 weeks. A month and a half of waiting, wondering when Porter would make his move. What protection do we have? Cole asked. Garrett's expression said everything. I've got 3 deputies covering a territory the size of some eastern states. We'll do what we can, but I can't guard everyone all the time. So we're on our own. Not entirely. I'm setting up a telegraph system. Anything happens, you wire immediately and we'll respond. He distributed cards with the telegraph office code. But you need to be smart. Stay in groups. Don't travel alone. Keep weapons close. After Garrett left, the families gathered in small clusters, talking in low voices about what to do. Some wanted to leave immediately, get out before Porter could retaliate. Others argued for staying, saying running would mean Porter won anyway. Evelyn stood at the window watching the sun set and felt the weight of every decision pressing down on her shoulders. She'd started this, pushed for confrontation when they could have taken Porter's deal and walked away. It's not your fault, Cole said quietly, appearing beside her. Isn't it? I'm the one who demanded we fight, who convinced everyone they had a chance. And you were right. We do have a chance. Porter's going to trial, and all that evidence is documented. Even if something happens to us, the case continues. That's not comforting. No, but it's true. He took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar now. We knew this would be hard, dangerous. Nothing about that has changed. Everything's changed. Before we were fighting from the shadows, gathering evidence. Now we're exposed, and Porter knows exactly who to target. Cole was quiet for a moment. So what do you want to do? It was the same question he'd asked days ago, but this time Evelyn didn't have a ready answer. Fear and determination warred inside her, and she wasn't sure which would win. I want to finish this, she finally said. But I don't know if I'm strong enough. You marched into Porter's bank with half the town watching and demanded to see his books. You're strong enough. That was different. That was momentum, anger. This is just... She gestured helplessly, waiting, trying to survive long enough to see justice done. That's harder. Yeah, Cole agreed. It is. They stood in silence, hands clasped, watching darkness fall over the valley. The attacks stopped for a week, and the absence of violence was somehow worse than the actual threats. Evelyn caught herself jumping at shadows, misinterpreting normal sounds as danger. She wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating properly, and from the looks of Cole, neither was he. Then Margaret Chen was attacked on the road between Copper Creek and Red Hollow. 2 men on horseback ran her wagon off the road, and only the fact that Dutch Keller happened to be nearby scared them off. Margaret was shaken, but unhurt, and she refused to file a complaint with Sheriff Davies. What's the point? She said when Evelyn visited her the next day. Davies won't do anything. He's waiting to see who wins, us or Porter. And right now, smart money's on Porter. The trial is 6 weeks away. A lot can happen in 6 weeks. Margaret's hands shook as she poured tea. I'm not telling you what to do, Evelyn, but I'm pulling my testimony. Whatever happens to Porter, it's not worth dying over. Margaret, if you withdraw, others will too. The case falls apart. Then it falls apart. I already lost my husband. I'm not losing my life too. Evelyn rode back to the ranch feeling the foundation of everything they'd built crumbling. If witnesses started withdrawing, The prosecution would weaken. Porter might walk free, and then there'd be nothing stopping his retribution. She found Cole in the barn shoeing his horse. He took one look at her face and set down the hammer. "Margaret's out," Evelyn said flatly. "She's withdrawing her testimony." Cole closed his eyes briefly. "Can't blame her." "I can. I do. We all stood together. We can't start breaking now." "Evelyn, she's terrified. We all are." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe we should consider it too. Withdrawing, I mean. We gave Marshal Garrett everything he needs. Our testimony isn't essential. It's the most essential. We're the ones who organized this, who pushed for the investigation. If we withdraw, everyone else will too. And if we don't, we might end up like John Chen, dead from a convenient heart attack." The words hung heavy between them. This was the first time Cole had openly acknowledged that staying meant risking their lives. "Is that what you want?" Evelyn asked. "To withdraw?" "I want you alive." His voice cracked slightly. "I married a stranger for convenience, and somehow she became someone I can't imagine losing. So yes, if withdrawing keeps you safe, then that's what I want." Evelyn felt something break open in her chest. They'd been dancing around this for weeks, the growing closeness, the way they'd started, depending on each other, the shift from partnership to something deeper. "I can't," she said quietly. "Cole, I can't withdraw, because if I do, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I ran when it mattered. Again. And I can't live with that." "Even if it gets you killed?" Even then, he pulled her close, and she went, pressing her face against his shoulder and letting herself feel the fear she'd been holding back. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim barn, while outside the world waited to see who would break first. 2 weeks before the trial, Porter made his move. It wasn't subtle. He filed a civil lawsuit against 23 families claiming defamation, slander, and conspiracy to defraud. The lawsuit demanded damages totaling $50,000 to be paid immediately or satisfied through property seizure. "It's a legal trick," Evelyn explained to the gathered families in the church building they'd borrowed for the meeting. "He can't collect while the criminal case is pending, but he's trying to intimidate witnesses. Make us think that even if he goes to jail, he'll bankrupt us in civil court." "Will it work?" Sarah Boone asked. "The lawsuit, I mean?" "Only if we let it scare us into silence." Evelyn spread the legal documents on the table. "The defamation claim requires proving we lied. But we didn't. Everything we testified to is documented in his own bank records." "But we have to pay lawyers to fight it," Thomas Marsh pointed out. "Even if we win, the cost of defense could ruin us." "Not if we mount a collective defense, pool our resources, hire one attorney to represent all of us." Evelyn had been up all night working this out. "It's not ideal, but it's survivable." "Where do we find an attorney willing to go against Porter?" Dutch asked. "Helena. I'll go myself if I have to." "That's a week's travel minimum," Cole said, "and Porter knows the roads you'd take." "Then I'll take different roads. Go through the mountains if I have to." Evelyn looked around the room at the exhausted, frightened faces. "But we can't give up now. We're so close." "Close to what?" Margaret's voice cut through. "Porter's out of jail. He's filed lawsuit. He's attacking us legally and physically, and we're just supposed to endure it, hoping justice eventually happens?" "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "Because the alternative is surrendering everything we fought for." The room fell silent. Some people nodded, others looked away. That night, Cole and Evelyn had their first real fight. "You can't go to Helena," he said flatly. "It's too dangerous. We need a lawyer. Then I'll go. You're needed here. The ranch, the coordination, the ranch can wait. You staying alive can't." Cole's voice rose. "Every time you put yourself at risk, every time you volunteer for the dangerous job, I have to watch and wonder if you're coming back. I can't keep doing that." "So what do you want me to do? Hide? Let someone else take the risks while I stay safe?" "Yes. For once, yes. Let someone else be the hero." "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to survive the only way I know how, by fighting back." They stood facing each other across the kitchen, both breathing hard. Outside, wind rattled the windows. "I love you," Cole said abruptly. "I didn't mean to, didn't plan on it, but somewhere between your first day here and now it happened, and I can't lose you." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. "Cole, so I'm asking, begging, if I have to. Let someone else go to Helena. Stay here where I can protect you. She wanted to say yes, wanted to fold into his arms and let someone else carry the weight for a while. But she'd spent too many years being protected, being told to stay small and safe, and look where it had gotten her. I'll be careful, she said. I'll take back roads, travel with a group if possible, but I have to go, because I'm the only one who understands the case well enough to explain what we need. Cole's expression closed off. Fine, but I'm coming with you. The ranch can survive a week without me. You? I'm not so sure about. In the end, they compromised. Cole would accompany her to Helena, and Dutch would manage the ranch and coordination efforts. They'd leave in 2 days, taking the mountain route that was longer but less traveled. The night before departure, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in Sarah's bed, her bed now, she supposed, and thought about everything that had brought her here. Baltimore felt like another lifetime, another person. The woman who'd fled her debts and stolen an identity felt like a stranger. Somewhere around midnight, she heard her bedroom door open quietly. Can't sleep either? Cole's voice came from the darkness. No. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry about earlier, the fight. You were right to be worried. It is dangerous. That's not what I'm apologizing for. He took her hand. I'm sorry for trying to make you into someone you're not. You're not the kind of person who hides. I knew that from the first day. It's part of why I... He stopped, then continued. Why I fell in love with you. Evelyn sat up, and in the dim moonlight through the window, she could see his face. I love you too, she said. I didn't want to. It complicated everything. But it's true. He leaned in and kissed her, gentle and careful, like she might break. She kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. This marriage that had started as convenience, as survival, had become something real. They made love slowly, discovering each other in the darkness. Afterward, lying tangled together, Evelyn felt something settle inside her. Not peace exactly, but resolution. Whatever happens in Helena, she said quietly, we face what comes next together. Together, Cole agreed. They left at dawn, riding north into mountains still capped with snow. The journey was hard, cold nights, difficult trails, constant vigilance for Porter's men who might be following. But they made good time, and 5 days later they rode into Helena. The territorial capital was bigger than Red Hollow, more established, with brick buildings and actual streets. Evelyn felt like a rustic appearing in civilization, but she pushed the feeling aside and headed straight for the federal attorney's office. The prosecutor assigned to Porter's case was a woman named Catherine Morrison, which surprised Evelyn more than it should have. Morrison was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with an office stacked high with case files. Mrs. Mercer, she said, shaking Evelyn's hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. I've been reading your documentation. Impressive work for someone without legal training. My father was a clerk. He taught me to be thorough. Thorough doesn't begin to cover it. You've built a case that would make most lawyers weep with envy. Morrison gestured to chairs. So what brings you all the way to Helena? I thought Marshal Garrett was coordinating with witnesses. Evelyn explained Porter's civil lawsuit, the intimidation tactics, the need for legal defense. Morrison listened, her expression growing darker. He's trying to bankrupt you before trial. Classic intimidation tactic, unfortunately also legal. Can you help? The federal prosecutor's office doesn't handle civil cases, but Morrison pulled out a card. This is a colleague who does pro bono work for territories' disputes. Tell him I sent you. He'll at least give you a consultation. The lawyer, a man named Robert Chen, no relation to Margaret, he assured them, agreed to take the case for minimal fees paid over time. Porter's lawsuit is aggressive but weak, Chen said after reviewing the documents. Defamation requires proving malicious intent and false statements. You have documented truth. I can get this dismissed, but it'll take time. How much time? 3 months minimum, maybe 6. 6 months of legal limbo, of costs accumulating, of Porter finding new ways to squeeze them. But it was better than nothing. They left Helena 6 days after arriving, with legal representation secured and Catherine Morrison's promise that the criminal trial would proceed on schedule, regardless of Porter's civil machinations. The ride back felt different. Lighter, somehow, despite the ongoing threat. They'd accomplished what they needed to. Help was coming. 3 miles from the ranch, They ran into Dutch Keller riding hard. "Thank God," he said, reining up beside them. "You need to see this." He led them back to Red Hollow, where a crowd had gathered in front of what used to be the first bank of Red Hollow. The building was a burned-out shell, walls still standing, but roof gone, windows shattered, everything inside destroyed. "Happened 2 nights ago," Dutch said. "Fire started around midnight. By the time anyone could respond, it was too late." Evelyn stared at the ruins, her mind racing. The records, all gone. Every loan document, every ledger, every piece of evidence Porter kept in that vault, burned to ash. Cole swore quietly. Porter did this. "Can't prove it. He was in Denver when it happened, meeting with his lawyers. Has a dozen witnesses." "But his men, same story. All of Porter's known associates were elsewhere, all with alibis." Dutch's expression was grim. "He planned this perfectly, destroyed the primary evidence and made sure he couldn't be connected to it." Evelyn felt something crack inside her. All that work, all that risk, and Porter had simply burned it away. "We still have the copies," she said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. "The documents we collected from families, the spreadsheets I made, secondary evidence," Dutch said gently. "I talked to Marshal Garrett. He says it'll still work for the trial, but it's weaker. Defense lawyers can argue the copies were forged, that without the originals to compare against, there's reasonable doubt." "No." Evelyn shook her head. "No, we didn't come this far to lose because of one fire." But even as she said it, she could see the calculation in everyone's eyes. Porter had struck a devastating blow, and they were running out of ways to fight back. That night, lying in Cole's arms, Evelyn finally let herself cry. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. From the weight of carrying so many people's hopes and watching them crumble despite everything she'd done. "We haven't lost yet," Cole murmured against her hair. "The trial's still happening. Morrison says she can make the case with what we have." "But it's weaker now. Porter's lawyer will tear it apart." "Maybe. Or maybe the jury will see through it." He pulled back to look at her. "You taught me something, Evelyn. You taught me that fighting back matters even when you might lose. Because the alternative is accepting defeat without trying." She wanted to believe him, wanted to find that spark of determination that had carried her this far. Instead, she just felt tired. But tired wasn't the same as defeated. Not yet. The trial was set for the second week of April in the federal courthouse in Helena. Evelyn spent the intervening weeks preparing testimony with Catherine Morrison, going over every detail until she could recite the numbers in her sleep. Cole managed the ranch and tried to keep their small coalition of families from splintering completely under the sustained pressure of Porter's civil lawsuit and ongoing intimidation. 3 more families withdrew their testimony. Sarah Boone sold her sheep ranch at a loss and moved back east. The Kellers held firm but stopped attending coordination meetings, too exhausted to do more than survive day to day. Rebecca Marsh had a miscarriage that everyone suspected was from stress, and her husband Thomas stopped speaking entirely, just worked his land with grim determination and refused to make eye contact. By the time they boarded the train to Helena, only 9 families were still willing to testify. 9 out of the original 23. Porter's campaign of attrition had worked better than his lawyer ever could. "It's enough," Morrison assured them at their final preparation meeting the night before trial. 9 families with consistent testimony, documented contracts, and a clear pattern of fraud. The jury will see it. But Evelyn heard the uncertainty underneath. Morrison was good, probably the best federal prosecutor in the territory, but she was working with damaged evidence and terrified witnesses against a defense attorney who'd been flown in from Chicago and cost more per day than most people made in a year. The courthouse was imposing, 3 stories of granite and marble, with columns that made Evelyn feel small. Porter sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking every inch the respectable businessman wrongly accused. His attorney, a silver-haired man named Aldrich, had the kind of smooth confidence that came from never losing. The jury was 12 men, all local to Helena, all supposed to be impartial. Evelyn studied their faces during selection and saw skepticism, boredom, and in a few cases, outright hostility toward the whole proceeding. These were men who understood business, who respected success, who might very well believe that a few altered loan terms were just smart dealing rather than criminal fraud. Morrison's opening statement was clinical and precise, laying out the evidence methodically. Aldrich's response was theatrical, painting Porter as a pillar of the community being persecuted by ungrateful borrowers who'd mismanaged their finances and needed someone to blame. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aldrich said, though there were no ladies on the jury, "this is a story as old as civilization itself. People borrow money they cannot repay, and when the debt comes due, they cry foul. They claim they were cheated, that the terms were unclear, that the lender somehow tricked them. But the simple truth is this: Samuel Porter provided capital to struggling ranchers when no one else would. He took risks on people everyone else had written off. And now, because some of those risks didn't pay off, he stands accused of fraud. It's not just wrong. It's a perversion of justice." The first 2 days were technical testimony. Morrison walked through the loan documents, showing the original contracts versus the payment schedules Porter had sent. An accounting expert testified about the mathematical impossibility of the numbers matching up. A handwriting analyst confirmed that alterations had been made to several contracts after signing. Aldrich dismantled each point with surgical precision. The accounting expert admitted under cross-examination that errors could occur in record-keeping. The handwriting analyst conceded that not all the alterations were definitively in Porter's hand. The documentary evidence, without the originals from the burned bank, remained open to interpretation. On the third day, the witnesses began testifying. Dutch Keller went first, describing how he'd lost his cattle operation to foreclosure despite making regular payments. Aldrich painted him as a poor manager who'd drunk away his profits. Margaret Chen testified about her husband's death and the loss of their ranch. Aldrich implied grief had clouded her memory of the financial details. One by one, Porter's victims took the stand, and one by one, Aldrich eroded their credibility with small cuts, suggesting they'd misunderstood terms, misremembered payments, kept inadequate records of their own. By the time Evelyn was called to testify on the fifth day, she could feel the case slipping away. The jury's skepticism had hardened into something close to decision. They'd heard enough, seen enough, and weren't convinced. Morrison led her through the testimony carefully. How she'd discovered the altered loan terms in Cole's contract. How she'd gathered documentation from other families. How the pattern emerged once you looked at the full scope of Porter's operation. "Mrs. Mercer," Morrison said, "in your investigation, did you find any instance where Mr. Porter's bank charged the interest rate stated in the original contract?" "No. Every single loan we documented showed inflated interest and unauthorized fees." "And how many loans did you examine?" 43 total. We have documentation for 23 of those." "What happened to the other 20 families' documents?" "Some were lost. Some families were too afraid to come forward, and several were stored in the bank vault that burned." Morrison nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Mercer." Aldrich stood for cross-examination with the air of a man about to enjoy himself. "Mrs. Mercer, you arrived in Red Hollow under a false name, did you not?" Evelyn's stomach tightened. "Yes." "You were fleeing debts in Baltimore?" "Yes." "How much did you owe?" "Approximately $300. $300? Aldrich let that hang. "And yet you're here testifying about financial fraud. Interesting. Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, did you receive any formal training in accounting or law?" "My father taught me bookkeeping." "Your father? Not a professional school or university. Your father, who I believe was a clerk who died when you were 12? "Yes." "So your entire expertise in financial matters comes from lessons you received as a child from a man who was not himself a financial professional." Morrison objected, but the judge allowed it. Evelyn felt the trap closing. "I know how to read contracts," she said. "I know basic mathematics. Those are the only skills required to see that Porter's numbers don't match his contracts." "Or perhaps," Aldrich said smoothly, "they're the only skills required to misinterpret complex financial arrangements and jump to criminal conclusions. Tell me, Mrs. Mercer, when you married Cole Mercer using a false identity, did you consider that fraud?" "Objection." Morrison was on her feet. "Relevance? Goes to credibility, Your Honor. The witness is testifying about fraud while having committed fraud herself." The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it. They'd seen Evelyn's face when the question landed. Aldrich continued picking apart her testimony for another hour. By the time she stepped down, she felt flayed. Cole was waiting in the gallery, and the look in his eyes told her he understood how badly it had gone. That night in their hotel room, Evelyn sat by the window and watched Helena's streets empty as darkness fell. We're going to lose, she said. Cole didn't argue. Morrison still has closing arguments. She's good. Not good enough. Aldrich destroyed every witness, made us look like incompetent fools who can't manage our own finances and want to blame someone else. Evelyn's voice was flat. The jury's already decided. They're just waiting to make it official. Then we accept it and move on. Move on to what? Porter walks free? The civil lawsuit bankrupts everyone who testified. And nothing changes except we gave people false hope before crushing them. Cole crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. You didn't give false hope. You gave people the chance to fight back. That matters. Even if we lose. Does it? What's the point of fighting if you just end up broken anyway? The point is you tried. The point is you didn't let Porter win without making him work for it. His grip tightened. Evelyn, I spent 5 years after Sarah died just surviving, going through motions, waiting to lose the ranch because I didn't have the energy to fight. You changed that. You showed me that even losing while fighting is better than surrendering without trying. She wanted to believe him, but exhaustion and defeat weighed too heavy. The next morning, closing arguments began. Morrison was eloquent, passionate, laying out the case with precision, but Evelyn could see the jury's faces, could read their body language. They'd made up their minds. Aldrich's closing was masterful. He didn't just defend Porter, he elevated him, made him a hero of frontier capitalism. A man willing to take risks on desperate people, now being persecuted for his generosity. The prosecution wants you to believe that Samuel Porter is a criminal mastermind who defrauded dozens of families over years, Aldrich said, his voice rich with false wonder. But ask yourselves, is it more likely that an experienced banker engaged in a complex, long-running fraud scheme, or that some struggling ranchers who made poor financial decisions are looking for someone to blame? Occam's razor, gentlemen, the simplest explanation is usually correct, and the simple truth is that these people borrowed money, couldn't pay it back, and are now crying fraud to escape their obligations. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, their verdict was written on their faces before the foreman spoke. We find the defendant, Samuel Porter, not guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Morrison's face went white. Porter smiled. Not triumphant, just satisfied, like a man who'd known the outcome all along. Evelyn sat frozen, feeling the world collapse around her. 9 families had risked everything to testify. Months of work, all that evidence, all that hope. Gone. Cole's hand found hers, squeezing hard enough to hurt. That small pain was the only thing keeping her grounded. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Porter. He gave a gracious statement about respecting the jury's wisdom and looking forward to rebuilding his reputation. His eyes found Evelyn in the crowd, and his smile widened. He'd won, completely, totally, devastatingly won. Morrison found them an hour later in a small cafe, looking 10 years older. I'm sorry, I thought we had enough. It's not your fault, Evelyn said numbly. You did everything you could. The civil lawsuit will proceed. Porter's lawyers already filed to accelerate the schedule now that the criminal case is resolved in his favor. Morrison set down papers. I know an attorney in Denver who might be able to help, but it would cost money they didn't have, time they couldn't spare, energy none of them had left. They took the train back to Red Hollow the next day. The ride was silent, both of them lost in separate griefs. Evelyn stared out the window at the passing landscape and felt nothing. Not anger, not fear, just empty. When they arrived, Dutch Keller was waiting at the station with news that somehow made everything worse. Porter bought the general store, he said without preamble. Wilson sold out this morning. Porter's also putting in offers on the boarding house and the saloon. He's buying up the whole town. How? Cole asked. His bank accounts were supposed to be frozen. Were frozen. Not anymore. Soon as the verdict came through, his assets were released, and he's spending fast, locking down every business that matters. Dutch looked exhausted. He's also calling in loans. Everyone who testified is getting foreclosure notices. We have 30 days to pay in full or surrender property. 30 days. The civil lawsuit would take months to resolve, but Porter didn't need it. He could destroy them through legitimate business dealings, foreclosures based on debts they couldn't contest because the evidence had burned. That night, Evelyn and Cole sat at their kitchen table and did the math. They had $800 in principal debt, plus Porter's inflated interest and fees. Even selling everything, the cattle, the equipment, the furniture, they might raise $600. They would lose the ranch. It was just a matter of time. We could fight the foreclosure, Cole said, but without conviction. Get Robert Chen to file an injunction. On what grounds? Porter has documentation showing we're in debt. We can't prove the debt is fraudulent because the original's burned. Evelyn pushed the papers away. He planned this perfectly. The verdict gave him cover for everything. So what do we do? Evelyn looked around the kitchen. Sarah's kitchen, really, though she'd started thinking of it as her own. This house that had become home. This life she'd built from nothing. I don't know, she admitted. I'm out of ideas. For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, she had no plan, no angle, no way forward, just defeat. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Families started abandoning their homesteads, unable to face foreclosure. Tom Wickham died, his heart finally giving out, the doctor said, though everyone knew it was despair that killed him. The Marshes packed up and headed to Oregon, leaving in the middle of the night to avoid Porter's men. Red Hollow became a ghost town, hollowed out from the inside as Porter systematically acquired everything worth owning. Evelyn stopped attending meetings, stopped trying to coordinate resistance that no longer existed. She worked the ranch mechanically, feeding animals and mending fences because the alternative was sitting still and thinking about everything she'd destroyed. Cole tried to reach her, but she'd retreated somewhere inside herself he couldn't follow. They moved around each other like polite strangers, the intimacy of the previous weeks buried under layers of grief and failure. Then 3 days before their foreclosure date, Margaret Chen arrived at the ranch with a stranger. The man was young, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and a worn leather bag. He introduced himself as James Wheeler, reporter for the Denver Post. Mrs. Chen told me about your case, he said, settling into a kitchen chair. The trial, the verdict, what's happening here in Red Hollow. I'd like to write about it. Evelyn stared at him blankly. Why? Because it's news. Financial fraud on a frontier, a trial that went wrong, a town being systematically destroyed by one man's revenge. Wheeler pulled out a notebook. People should know what's happening here. What good does that do? Porter won. The jury said he's innocent. The jury said the prosecution couldn't prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. That's different from saying he's innocent. Wheeler leaned forward. I've covered enough trials to know the difference between justice and legal technicality. Your case had merit. It just had better lawyers on the other side. So you write a story. Then what? Porter still owns everything. We still lose. Maybe. But public opinion matters, Mrs. Mercer. Investors care about reputation. Banks care about public trust. If enough people read about what Porter did here, it becomes harder for him to operate elsewhere. Cole had been listening from the doorway. You're talking about revenge, not justice. I'm talking about accountability, which is sometimes the best you can get when justice fails. Evelyn felt something stir in the numbness. Not hope exactly, but anger. The same anger that had carried her into Porter's bank demanding to see his records. What do you need? She asked. Everything. Documents, testimony, names of families affected. I want the full story, not just the trial. Over the next 2 days, Evelyn gave Wheeler everything she had. Every document, every spreadsheet, every detail of Porter's operation. He interviewed the families who remained, photographed the burned-out bank, documented the systematic acquisition of town businesses. This is going to make waves, he said on his last day. Denver Post has a circulation of 20,000. Once this runs, other papers will pick it up. You're looking at territory-wide coverage, maybe national. And then? Evelyn asked. Then we see what happens. Public pressure, potential new investigations, investors pulling out of Porter's enterprises. Can't promise it'll save your ranch, but it might stop him from doing this elsewhere. Wheeler left on the morning train. That afternoon, Porter's lawyer delivered the final foreclosure notice. They had 72 hours to vacate. Cole found Evelyn in the barn, sitting in the hayloft where she'd found refuge as a child might. I'm sorry, she said when he climbed up beside her. I thought I could fix this. Thought I was smart enough, stubborn enough, but I just made everything worse. You didn't make it worse. Porter did. All you did was shine light on what he was doing. And that light got people hurt. Cost them their homes, their livelihoods. Tom Wickham died because of this. Tom Wickham died because Porter crushed him over years. You tried to stop it. That's not the same as causing it. Cole took her hand. Evelyn, you can't take responsibility for every bad thing that happened. Porter's the one who committed fraud. Porter's the one who retaliated. You just refused to be a victim. There's no shame in that. Even when refusing costs everyone everything? Even then. Because the alternative is teaching people that fighting back just makes things worse. And that's how men like Porter win, by making resistance seem futile. Evelyn leaned against him, exhausted beyond measure. What do we do now? We pack what we can carry. We leave with our dignity, and we start over somewhere Porter's reach doesn't extend. It was the same advice he'd given weeks ago, before the trial. But this time Evelyn had no counterargument. They were out of options. They spent the next day sorting through belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave. Evelyn packed Sarah's diary, the spreadsheet she'd made, every document that might someday prove useful. Cole packed tools and supplies, practical things for starting over. On their last night in the house, they made love quietly, desperately, holding on to each other like lifelines. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. I love you, she said. Whatever happens next, whatever we lose, I need you to know that this, us, wasn't a mistake. I know, Cole murmured against her hair. You're the best thing that came out of this mess. Only good thing, maybe. They fell asleep in each other's arms as the house creaked around them, this home they were about to lose. Morning came too soon. They loaded the wagon with what they could carry, left the keys on the kitchen table, and drove away without looking back. They made it 5 miles before they saw the riders coming. Cole reached for the rifle, but Evelyn put her hand on his arm. Wait. As the riders got closer, she recognized faces. Dutch Keller in front, then Margaret Chen, Rebecca and Thomas Marsh, half a dozen others. All the families who'd stayed, who'd testified, who'd lost everything. They formed a line across the road, blocking the wagon's path. Dutch rode forward, his expression unreadable. Where do you think you're going? Away, Cole said simply. Before Porter sends someone to make sure we understand we're not welcome. Well, that's a problem, because we kind of need you to stay. Evelyn stared at him. Why? It's over, Dutch. We lost. That's what I thought too. Then this morning, Wheeler's article hit the Denver Post. Dutch pulled out a newspaper, holding it up so they could see the headline, Frontier Fraud. How one banker stole a valley. It's just a newspaper story, Evelyn said. Porter doesn't care about bad press. Maybe not, but his investors do, and the territorial governor does, and the federal marshal's office does. Dutch's smile was grim. Wheeler didn't just write a human interest piece, he documented systematic fraud across territorial lines, showed how the justice system failed, named every official who looked the other way. It's causing a firestorm in Helena. Margaret rode up beside him. We got word an hour ago. There's going to be a new investigation. Federal this time with oversight from Washington. They're looking at not just Porter, but everyone who enabled him. Judges, lawyers, the whole system. That doesn't help us, Cole pointed out. Investigation takes months. We don't have months. No, but you have this. Thomas Marsh handed over an envelope. Inside was a legal document, a temporary injunction halting all foreclosures related to Porter's loans pending the new investigation. Evelyn read it twice, not quite believing. How did you get this? Turns out the territorial governor doesn't like being called corrupt in newspapers. He personally ordered the injunction to show he's taking the scandal seriously. Rebecca's voice was stronger than Evelyn had heard in weeks. We're not saying you won, but you bought us time, a chance to fight this properly, with federal support and public scrutiny. Cole looked at Evelyn. What do you think? She thought about running, about starting over somewhere safe and anonymous, about never having to face Porter again, never having to fight battles she might lose. Then she thought about Sarah Mercer's diary, about the woman who'd suspected Porter's fraud and documented it in hopes someone would eventually care, about Tom Wickham and John Chen and all the people who'd died under Porter's thumb, about the families still struggling to survive. I think we go back, she said quietly. I think we fight until there's nothing left to fight with. And then we fight some more. Dutch nodded. Good, because we've got work to do. They turned the wagon around and drove back to the ranch, back to the house that was somehow still theirs for now, back to the fight that wasn't over. That evening, gathered in their kitchen with the families who'd stayed, Evelyn laid out a new plan. Not dramatic, not revolutionary, just methodical documentation for the new investigation, coordinated testimony, careful organization. The work they should have been doing all along, except this time they had something they'd lacked before: public attention and federal support. Over the next 3 months, everything changed slowly. Wheeler's article was picked up by papers across the West. The territorial governor, desperate to save his reputation, appointed a special prosecutor. The federal investigation uncovered not just Porter's fraud, but a network of corruption stretching across 3 territories. Porter fought back, but every move he made got documented in newspapers. Every witness he intimidated became another story. Every legal maneuver, another headline. Public pressure did what the justice system couldn't. His investors pulled out. His political connections abandoned him. Banks that had partnered with him severed ties to protect their own reputations. The civil lawsuit collapsed when Porter's lawyers withdrew, unwilling to be associated with the mounting scandal. The foreclosures were permanently halted. And in August, a federal grand jury indicted Porter on 43 counts of fraud, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. This time there was no bail. He sat in jail awaiting trial while his empire dissolved around him. The second trial was different. New prosecutor, new evidence, and a jury that had read the newspapers and understood what was at stake. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Porter was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His properties were seized, auctioned off to pay restitution to victims. The families who'd lost their ranches got them back. The fraudulent loans were voided. It wasn't perfect justice. Tom Wickham and John Chen stayed dead. Some families had scattered too far to return. The trauma of the fight left scars that would never fully heal. But it was something. More than they'd had. More than Evelyn had thought possible. A year after the verdict, Evelyn stood in the ranch kitchen, their kitchen now, truly, and looked at the account books. The ranch was profitable for the first time in 6 years. Cole had hired 2 ranch hands and was planning to expand the herd. They'd paid off the remaining legitimate debts and had money in the bank. More than that, they'd built something. Not just a ranch, but a community. The families who'd survived Porter's reign had bound together, supporting each other, learning that collective strength mattered more than individual survival. Cole came in from checking the north fence, dirt-streaked and tired, but smiling. "Fence is solid, should hold through winter." "Good." Evelyn closed the ledger. "I got a letter from Wheeler today. He's writing a book about the case, wants to interview us for it. You going to do it?" She thought about that, about having her story told, her mistakes documented alongside her victories. "Yeah, I think people should know what happened here. The good and the bad." Cole washed his hands at the sink, then came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think Sarah would have liked you, would have been glad her work finding Porter's fraud eventually mattered." Evelyn leaned back against him, feeling safe in a way she'd never expected to feel. "I wish I could have met her." "In a way you did. Through her diary, her records, her determination to document the truth, even when nobody was listening." He kissed the top of her head. "You finished what she started. That's a kind of meeting." They stood like that for a long time, watching evening settle over the valley through the kitchen window. This valley that had almost broken them. This home they'd almost lost. This life they'd built from desperation and determination and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train in Red Hollow 8 months ago, running from debts, hiding behind false names, terrified of being caught. That woman seemed like a stranger now. The truth was, she'd learned something in those months of fighting, something about the difference between surviving and living. Surviving was what she'd done in Baltimore, hiding, running, making herself small to avoid notice. Living was what she'd done here, fighting back, taking risks, refusing to let fear dictate her choices. She'd lose again, probably. Life wasn't neat enough to guarantee victory. But she'd learned that losing while fighting was better than surrendering without trying. That some things were worth risking everything for. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. "Cole," she said quietly. Thank you. For what? For taking a chance on a stranger with a fake name and a pile of debts. For standing beside me when it would have been smarter to run. For loving me even when I was too stubborn and too scared to admit I loved you back. He turned her around to face him, his rough hands gentle on her face. You saved my life, Evelyn. Maybe not literally, but every way that matters. I was dying slow out here, just waiting for Porter to finish me off. You gave me a reason to fight, to hope. That's worth more than smart. They kissed, long and slow, and Evelyn felt the last pieces of her old self fall away. She wasn't Evelyn Cross from Baltimore anymore, running from debts and hiding from consequences. She wasn't even Evelyn Turner, the convenient fiction she'd used to escape. She was Evelyn Mercer, wife, rancher, fighter. A woman who'd stared down corruption and won. Not perfectly, not easily, but enough. Outside, the sun set over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Inside their house, the house they'd fought for, bled for, nearly died for, Evelyn and Cole held each other and looked toward a future that was finally, improbably, theirs. The valley had been saved, not by heroes or miracles, but by ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage when everything was on the line. By families who'd stood together when it would have been easier to scatter. By a woman with a gift for numbers and a refusal to accept that power always won. Porter's empire was gone, reduced to cautionary tales and newspaper articles. The families he'd crushed were rebuilding. And Red Hollow, that harsh frontier town that had judged Evelyn from the moment she arrived, had become something different. A place where justice was possible, where fighting back mattered, where the right thing could win if you were willing to pay the price. It wasn't the ending Evelyn had imagined when she'd signed that marriage contract on a frozen courthouse step. It was better. Messier, harder, marked by scars and losses she'd carry forever. But it was hers, truly, completely hers. And that, she'd learned, was worth every fight.